Hey there, and welcome back to the Natural Fertility and Wellness Podcast, where we discuss ways to naturally balance our hormones as well as increase fertility for those trying to get pregnant. If we haven't met before, I'm Danielle from naturalfertilityandwellness.com, and in this episode, we're going to be talking to Ann Melin, a certified clinical master herbalist, all about Maca. But before we start, please remember that this information is for educational purposes only and is not a medical diagnosis or personalized treatment plan. Make sure to discuss dietary and supplement changes with your healthcare practitioner. So now that we have the basic intro and disclaimers out of the way, here's Maca for Fertility with Ann. So Ann, why don't you cover some of the basics about maca, what it is and what people tend to use it for? It seems to be one of those herbs that everybody thinks, or everybody recommends. You see it on, fertility forums. Anytime women talk about hormones, hey, take this, take maca, it helped me. But what exactly is it and what does it do in the body?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I'll talk a little bit about what it is, and I'll talk about some of the claims about what it does in the body. I think that a lot of it's largely unknown, what it actually does. There's very little research actually out there supporting or providing evidence about what the actual mechanisms of action are. There's a lot of talk about what people think it does, and there's a lot of anecdotal sort of stories about what it may do. So I'll kind of talk about some of that, but I just want to preface it by saying, it's not necessarily all based in sound peer-reviewed clinical research and that kind of thing. Okay. Yeah. So maca it's basically just a root vegetable. It grows primarily, it kind of comes from the Peruvian Andes. And so I think part of its allure comes from that it grows in this really sort of intense environment and poor soil with a lot of extreme temperatures and weather conditions and winds, and that it's somehow this really hardy, resilient plant that as a result, somehow there's this idea that somehow those properties of the plant sort of transfer themselves into a person when they consume it. And I actually really like that sort of theoretical idea about that what a plant can transfer to a person is sort of based upon the way it grows and how it grows. I mean, even in traditional herbalism, there's some ideas about that plants will often shape themselves and look like the certain organs that they can influence. So things like the walnut looks like a brain and is good for brain health, and certain herbs that are good for lungs will kind of look like they have bronchioles that stream through the plant leaf as the bronchioles do through the lungs. So there's some sort of historical support for that from a traditional perspective, but that doesn't necessarily make it true across the board. So maca is this root vegetable. People call it a nutrient powerhouse because it does have a decent nutrient profile, but not really all that unsimilar to a lot of other root vegetables or vegetables that you can consume. But it does have some good nutrients in it. It also, some of the nutrients that are considered to have the effective properties that people often claim about maca are that it contains like phytonutrients that may be particularly nourishing to things like the endocrine system, which a lot of people are using maca to try to support endocrine system health. And there are also sort of some constituents to it that are kind of common to a lot of your cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cabbage and that kind of thing, that can help to actually reduce estrogens in the body if they're in excess, if there's estrogen dominance. So it's kind of interesting because there are some claims that there's kind of this phytoestrogenic property to maca that can help to enhance estrogen when it's low. And then there are these other constituents of maca that are thought to reduce estrogens when they're in excess. So there's some sort of support to that the plant does contain these different types of nutrients, but there's not really a lot of clinical evidence that suggests it's all that impactful one way or the other, especially on estrogen levels, except one of the most commonly cited studies is one that does show some enhancement of estrogen levels in postmenopausal women. So there does seem to be some impact there that's been somewhat substantiated.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. do you have a question there? Or do you want me to continue on for a minute?
No, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. So the other thing, the common thing that I see that I think is funny, it's just kind of a funny image, is that people talk about maca bathing the hypothalamus. And I don't know if you've heard that one. Yeah. Okay. So the idea being that it's an adaptogenic herb. So the way that adaptogenic herbs typically work is that they kind of regulate the way that the communication happens from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, and thereby regulates the pituitary's messaging to the other endocrine organs. So it sort of balances out what kinds of hormones the body's producing and when, and potentially fixes a feedback loop between the hypothalamus, pituitary, and the target endocrine organ that might have gone awry in their communication system. So I see this a lot. Maca bathes the hypothalamus, and so thereby produces this kind of optimal communication throughout the endocrine system. So those are a lot of the things that I think people are out there suggesting that how maca actually works in the body.
Okay. So you've covered some of, the benefits that people, have come up with for maca. What are some of the downfalls to taking it? Because the longer I've been in this health space, the more I notice that, not every herb and not every, food is going to have the same effect on everyone. So, while it might be good for some people, what are some of the downfalls of it?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And it's one, I really don't believe in any kind of panacea for anyone or for anything. And I think it's really common to lump all kinds of conditions together. So you can label infertility as infertility, but there are all sorts of different dimensions involved in infertility and all sorts of different things. Somebody might have endometriosis and estrogen dominance, while somebody else may have a total failure of their ovaries to produce any estrogen at all, right? So they might both be infertile, but for very, very different reasons. And so I think it's really, and then there's kind of the ones in the middle where it's not so exaggerated, and so they don't know. And those are the people who are usually just tossing whatever they see recommended at, and it's not necessarily a benefit. I mean, if I'm going to do anything and recommend any herbs with clients that could alter hormone levels at all, I always want to test them first so that I know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and instead of just saying, oh, this works for everybody regardless. So that's one thing. The other thing, just in terms of clinically what I see when I am testing people, and again, I can't claim that this is a peer-reviewed research study either. It's just what I see in my own clinical practice, which is that I can almost always tell when somebody's been taking maca when I look at a hormone profile, because what I'll tend to see, especially if a woman's otherwise depleted, so if I see really low estrogen, really low progesterone, and then I see even things like cortisol and melatonin and other sorts of hormones as well. Oftentimes I'll see somebody who's just really depleted across the board, and then their DHEA is kind of like high within the range or even above range. And I almost always know that they're taking maca when I see that. Not 100% of the time, but I always ask the question when I see that, because it happens enough that I see DHEA levels and androgen hormones go up more commonly than I see your kind of more dominant female hormones like estrogen and progesterone go up with the use of maca. And some of the primary studies that have been done on the benefits of maca are really demonstrated to be effective for male fertility. So enhancing sperm motility, enhancing male libido and strength and endurance and that kind of thing. So it makes sense in a way that you would start seeing androgen hormones really become more pronounced, even in women too. So this is particularly problematic in women who are struggling with infertility as a result of something like PCOS, which has an androgen dominant component, right? So I know a lot of women who take maca specifically to try to address issues involving, around PCOS. And I think that in particular is one of the most harmful things that you can, I would definitely not recommend it for women with PCOS. Additionally, there is some information suggesting that maca could be exacerbating to people with hypothyroidism, which is a pretty significant portion of the population of women who are already dealing with infertility as well. So those two things are areas where I would urge, even that much more caution. Given that there's also, it's hard to say because there are some constituents of maca that look like they can reduce estrogen levels and some that look like they could raise estrogen levels. So depending on the person, one of those mechanisms might be more activated than another. So, in those cases, it's hard to say. I wouldn't say necessarily, if you have low estrogen, you shouldn't take it, or if you have high estrogen, you shouldn't take it. Though I'm always wary about anything that might promote more estrogen in somebody who's already estrogen dominant. So I think I really think that the key is to have the hormones tested to know what you're dealing with. And then I think there are also some other great herbs that have a little bit more targeted action for certain things when you're trying to create hormone balance throughout the endocrine system. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that you mentioned hypothyroidism. I've been reading a lot about it again this last few months, and one of the things people often recommend is maca because they say it gives you energy.
Yeah.
So all these poor women that are struggling with fatigue take maca to hopefully feel better, but if their fatigue is rooted in hypothyroidism, they might end up, actually making the issue worse.
Yeah. I think it's such a hard thing because I think a lot of these systems go out of balance together, right? So it's like the reproductive hormones, the thyroid hormones, the adrenal hormones. It's like when one of those systems becomes imbalanced, the rest of them become imbalanced as well. And so it's really hard to do to sort it out on your own, to be honest. Like, I think it's great that we have so much information available to us through the internet and through websites and all that. And I also think like it needs to be approached with a certain degree of caution, because it's really easy to integrate information and to listen to anecdotal stories about one individual's experience and think that somehow will apply to you as well when your situation might really be different. People can show up with fatigue for different reasons from a sort of biochemical perspective. So I think it's really important to not assume that one person's beneficial experience that yours will mirror that. So
exactly.
Yeah.
I always like to tell people that we are our best health advocate, but not necessarily our own best doctor. Because really, as much as I have read and researched and, listened to experts speak about things, I sometimes have the hardest time pulling my symptoms together to even figure out what's going on. And so I'll go visit a holistic doctor and, we get the testing done and put all my symptoms together. And all of a sudden someone outside of, what I'm feeling emotionally and what I think might be going on can actually pinpoint something and make a much better diagnosis and get me on the right track. So
yeah, I have two thoughts that come to mind in response to that. And one is that I think that when it's so hard to be objective about yourself ever, right? Like it's just so challenging, I think, to be your own practitioner. So I think there's that piece of it. I also think that sometimes when you're dealing with any kind of chronic health issue, it's like we just need a partner in that journey, and we need a partner that's knowledgeable about what they're doing. And I like what you said too about being your own best health advocate, right? Because I see for myself as a clinician, like that it's really important for me to not just look at a test result in isolation. Like I always want to know, I take a really thorough intake with my clients because I always want to know, like, what are you experiencing? What's going on for you? And how do we use the test results to create a bigger picture, not to narrow the picture and say, oh, well, this is your problem, but to just say, okay, now there's a bigger perspective about what's going on here. And we take all of that information together to try to apply some strategies that could be beneficial.
Right.
Yeah.
So in regards to maca again, how do you know then if you should take it? And then what about proper dosing? Because, You can look at any container of maca and it'll give you a specific dose to take, but how do you know whether you're doing it right?
Yeah. So that all kind of depends upon the form that you're taking it in. And I think, so kind of to answer your first question first about when to take it, um, first of all, I would say, get your hormones checked and see what they're doing and see if it seems like an appropriate thing. If there are real extremes in your hormone profile, I probably wouldn't take maca. If things look relatively balanced and you're feeling somewhat fatigued and just trying to see what can support, I think that too, sometimes different herbs act differently on different people. So, I'll always have people kind of test things in on themselves and see, how do you respond to that? And then I'm always wanting to follow up within a few months and retest the hormone levels and see, okay, what have our interventions done here? Anything, or something desirable or something undesirable? So I think keeping track of what you're doing is important. Also, in terms of dosing, so maca comes in a lot of different forms. Most people are taking it in a powdered form. So there's kind of your traditional powdered form that has a lot of starches in it. And then there's the kind of gelatinized form of it, which has the starches removed. Some of the starches can cause kind of like gas and bloating in some people, especially who have already digestive issues, which is a whole other issue for a lot of women with kind of this combination of issues going on. So taking that, you see usually something in the range of like 3 to 9 grams ish a day as a serving of that. I would probably say I usually err a little bit more on the side of caution with things and say, oh, you can't overdose on maca, but that's when I see these women with like, they're just like dumping it into their smoothies every morning and their DHEA is going off the charts, right? So I would say probably closer to like the 1 to 2 gram a day mark, which would be, roughly, if you have a powder, about a teaspoon, a couple teaspoons. So teaspoon to a gram, roughly.
Okay.
And you could do that, 2 times a day, probably not later in the day, because it can have more of that energy promoting kind of impact. So you don't want to be doing that and then wired and not sleeping well, because that's even worse for your hormones than anything else. Also, though, like if you're not integrating it well, so the gelatinized form, interestingly, tends to be more absorbable, more readily absorbable, but the process of gelatinizing it also removes a lot of the active constituents. So you're not really like getting what you think you're getting when you use the gelatinized form of it. So you're just kind of getting, maybe something that has a little bit of an interesting taste and maybe some nutrients, but a lot of the potential hormone modulating nutrients are stripped through that process. Tinctures are also great. I'm a pretty big advocate of tinctures and taking things that way, because it helps to the tinctures will extract all of the kind of nutrient and phytonutrient and chemicals and things that are available within a plant. And then you could do like a full 1 to 2 full droppers, 1 to 2 times a day, depending on how it impacts you. I always recommend for people that you start at a low dose and kind of titrate your way up, so that you can, because different people respond differently to different things. And so 1 dropper full of something for somebody might be adequate, whereas for somebody else, they don't notice an impact until they get to 4 droppers full in a day. Probably wouldn't go much beyond that. I think that if you're not noticing a benefit from it beyond that, there's probably another herb out there that's better for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, a lot of women, they start taking maca and then they get pregnant. So is this something that's safe for pregnancy? Can they just quit taking it? So many women get so worried about just, not taking it right away because they don't want to mess up any hormone support that it's been doing. So what does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So in general, there haven't been any studies that show safety of a lot of herbs in pregnancy, or even a lot of pharmaceuticals, right? Because we don't like to do clinical trials on pregnant women, right? There's like some ethical issues involved with that. Now I think about this, I think anything when you start kind of doing high doses of it, especially when you're sort of trying to extract really particular sorts of nutrients that are going to cause an alterative effect, you probably don't want to be doing. I always think, like, okay, if you've gotten pregnant, that I prefer to see, okay, let's see what your body's going to do. Like the wisdom of a woman's body during pregnancy is pretty phenomenal with what it will do and the way that it will manage its own hormones. And I think that a lot of times we need to get out of the way, actually, and just allow for the wisdom of the body to kind of take hold. That said, it is just a root vegetable, right? So I don't really see that it has much in the way of harm necessarily, as long as you're not taking it in really like whopping dosages. So especially if you think about, you know, I also think, I don't know how much access we actually have. I don't think I've ever seen like an actual maca root plant. But I would think about, like, if you were to eat one, like you were eating a sweet potato or something, I can't possibly imagine that it would be harmful in that way. And that's how, you know, our bodies are really most designed to integrate foods anyway. So, you know, I think it's a tricky subject because, like I said at first, like we don't really have any studies showing safety. So I would recommend for a client of mine probably to stop taking it once she became pregnant.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions I had. Is there anything else you wanted to cover about it at all?
I think we kind of touched on all of the things that I really wanted to talk about. I think that the biggest issue that I want to drive home is the importance of really, and I've said this several times, but so I'm just going to repeat myself here, just the importance of really knowing what it is that you individually are dealing with, what your hormone profile looks like, and having a strategy to address that's really catered for you individually, rather than following along with some claims that suggest that one particular herb can benefit every single problem you can imagine that's endocrine related, right? Because I think that you always have to be wary when you see claims like that about any plant or medication or food or whatever.
Yes, I would agree with that. Now, tell me, you and Bridget have gotten together and are doing kind of like coaching practitioner. Tell me about that a little bit, just so that if people want help, you know, trying to figure out which herbs to use and which ones are going to benefit them, that they might have someone to go to.
Yeah, so Bridget Danner and I just launched our new collaborative coaching. So we're doing that through Women's Wellness Collaborative, and you can go onto the website there and you can read all about what we're doing. Essentially right now, the first step would be that you do a case review with Bridget. It's a half hour long, and that's kind of our first step process. So it's kind of an evaluation of whether or not what our services are really a fit for you, right? So not just like no one plant is a fit for every person, no one or two practitioners are a fit for every person, and we recognize that, and we don't just want to take your business if it's not a good fit. So Bridget does all those sessions right now, and she'll kind of determine with you if that seems like a good fit. And then after that, currently what we have is a series of about 6 sessions in the package. And I do 5 of those and Bridget does 1. And you can extend after that if you want to, or purchase individual sessions. But we really believe in having kind of a set package up front so that we can get focused about the work we're doing and really lay in a strategy appropriately and course correct it as necessary, and touch on all the different important things that go into really trying to build up your own health and vitality. So, you know, it's not just taking an herb, it's kind of looking at what's happening with the diet, what's happening with the person's stress levels, what's happening with your sleep patterns and habits, you know, exercise routine. So really trying to take into account a lot of these different lifestyle elements, rather than just throwing herbs or supplements at you. And you know, and we'll also do an evaluation of what test does it look like would benefit you most. You know, do we run a hormone panel most of the time, because we're catering to a female clientele, and largely working with a lot of women who have hormone imbalances. So we'll kind of assess what tests and labs look like they need to be run, and then we have that full package there. So.
Okay. So are you working with people in person and virtually, or just one or the other?
So right now it's pretty much all virtually. Bridget's in Portland and I'm in Vermont, so we're not working out of a clinic specifically, but we do a lot of this through video conferencing and that kind of thing. So it doesn't feel as disconnected as it might just through phone. I think it's really nice to be able to video conference with people.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Now, you also sent over a hormone balancing tea recipe that I'm going to put underneath this video on my site. So can you tell me just a little bit about the blend that you're going to give?
Yeah. So this blend is something that I will sometimes recommend, especially in cases of kind of overall depletion. So there are a couple things in there that I probably wouldn't recommend if there are kind of different imbalances in hormones. But, a lot of what I see, unfortunately, with a lot of women is that there is just depletion across the board. Like women have been so stressed out or so kind of nutrient deficient for so long that they've just become depleted on multiple levels. So it's kind of focused for that purpose, and mostly looking at trying to balance the female hormones. And I'm trying to bring up the exact formula that I sent you so that I have it in front of me. I know pretty much what's in it though. So typically, black cohosh being one of the herbs in there, and I've lost you. There you are. Okay. So black cohosh is something that I'll use a lot, especially with low.
I think I lost you.
You there?
Sorry about that. My internet totally just stopped. Lost everything.
You lost everything?
Yes. Well, I lost my internet. It kind of just flipped out. Okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So
let's start back at, you were just telling me when I lost you about black cohosh and what you use it for.
Yes. Okay. So typically for trying to encourage healthy estrogen levels. So black cohosh is kind of thought to have estrogen balancing effects. However, it's more commonly used for low estrogen levels and trying to bring estrogen levels up. So a lot of times used with postmenopausal women who are really suffering from low estrogen levels, but also with younger women who are experiencing estrogen depletion. It is one of those kind of phytoestrogenic herbs. And so there is some evidence suggesting that phytoestrogenic herbs can counteract estrogen dominance because they look so similar. The molecules look so similar to your endogenous estrogens, or even xenoestrogens that you're getting, but that they'll bind to the receptor sites and that they're less potent than the estrogens you're producing, and so it can decrease symptoms of estrogen dominance. I think that's there's some validity to that, and yet it makes me a little bit concerned to think about doing anything that might sort of mirror or enhance estrogen in any way with women who are estrogen dominant. So I think I use it more frequently with women with lower estrogen levels, trying to bring them up and encourage them up. It also has some dong quai in it, which has been shown to be a pretty nice hormone regulator, and it also has some benefit. It's kind of a traditional Chinese herb used in a lot of women's balancing formulas. It does tend to support energy a little bit and overall wellness and that kind of thing. A little bit of Vitex, which I know you've done some stuff on Vitex before as well, which again, just kind of considering herbs for what they're intended uses and not for what their unintended uses are. But it does have can have some beneficial impact when there's really low progesterone levels. So that was in there as well. There was some motherwort in there, which should not be used by people with hypothyroidism. So again, another herb to be avoided if there is hypothyroidism, but I think it's a wonderful herb if you don't have hypothyroidism. And especially in terms of balancing out kind of a female hormone blend formula. So it's kind of, it nicely kind of enhances and integrates and synergizes the effects of some of the other herbs. There was some shatavari in there, which is a traditional Ayurvedic herb, which supports women's hormonal health and estrogen levels. And so it's kind of like this multicultural blend here that we have going on. And there was also ashwagandha. So ashwagandha also, I notice a lot of the times promotes DHEA. So it seems to me to have a similar impact to maca. And it's what I see a lot of women come in with PCOS. They know they have PCOS and they're taking a ton of maca and ashwagandha. And I'm kind of like, let's take those out right now. And also ashwagandha can be provocative to any kind of autoimmune condition. So if you have autoimmunity at all, it's not something I would recommend unless you know specifically about that autoimmunity and how ashwagandha might impact it. And then, I threw some skullcap in there because I love skullcap mostly because it's it's a nervine. So it helps to calm anxiety and stress and that kind of thing without being necessarily adaptogenic like a lot of the other herbs that you might see in like a stress formula. But I think a lot of the time when we're dealing with hormone imbalances, we get anxious about our health. Most of us are stressed out anyway, right? So I think it's just kind of a nice thing to throw in the mix, to just provide a little bit of extra support.
Perfect.
I think that was everything that was in there. I don't have the thing right in front of me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Now, because I know I'm going to get asked, what part of the cycle should this tea be used?
Mm-hmm.
And someone is actively trying to conceive, should they stop using it after ovulation or?
Yeah. So typically, if I'm working with somebody who's overall deficient, I'm okay with using this kind of blend throughout the cycle. If you're actively trying to get pregnant and you are, and you've ovulated and you know that you're potentially about to become pregnant, I would probably stop taking anything that's going to impact hormone levels at that point, like I said, and just kind of let the body do its thing at that point. If you're overall, like I have some women who just, don't even have a period at all for months, years, or whatever, because they're so depleted. And so in those cases, I would just kind of keep taking it in an ongoing way. And then there are certain points when it's beneficial to sort of shift formulas and do certain formulas first half of the cycle and different formulas second half of the cycle. But that's a little bit more complex and refined than what we're talking about right now. Yeah.
All right. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned a lot from Ann. You can find her over at the Women's Wellness Collaborative. I'll put the link right below the video. If you want her hormone balancing tea recipe, you can just head over to my blog post where we have the summarized transcription of our video today, and you can sign up there and I'll send it directly to your email. I'll make sure the link is right below this video as well. Now, if you're interested in balancing your hormones naturally, don't forget to hit subscribe. See you guys next time.